Hello and welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, TJ Mabarty. We are running this late night special for the podcast. Tonight we are going to be talking about the Super Bowl. I've sort of been putting off making my official pick as we have counted down the days until the official matchup. So I'm going to be giving my official picks then in the second segment, and from there on out, we're going to be talking about some basketball in the NBA. The trade deadline just concluded yesterday while we were actually live on the show. So since then, I've had some time to go over these trades more in depth. And we're going to be talking about the winners and losers from the deadline, talking about a couple of the main prominent teams in the Lakers and Warriors that decided to stay put. And then finally, I'm going to be giving my power rankings post-trade deadline at the end of the show. Before we get into everything, just a reminder to like and follow. And without further ado, getting into this first segment here and talking about my predictions for Super Bowl 58. As of right now, the 49ers are 1.5 point favorites over the Chiefs. This is at least a number given by ESPN Bet. I've sort of talked about it earlier in the week, the fact that I was surprised to see that the 49ers were actually favored in this one, and specifically that all of these sports books would give the public another chance to bet on Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs as an underdog. Mahomes is now 10-3 as his career as an underdog, and I think that it's really interesting if you try and sort of look into the politics of it is probably the wrong word, but the way that sort of these sports books typically measure in public bets. It felt like last week there was an opportunity where a lot of people were sort of dubious of the Chiefs team, and for fair reason, based off of sort of their lack of truly proving themselves up to that point. I mean, obviously, yes, it's Mahomes, it's Andy Reid, it's all of the main guys that have been a part of this Super Bowl core for a while now, but this season, they just did not look the same, and I think that for a large part of that, and the fact that the Baltimore Ravens at the time were seen to be such a good team, they seemed so complete, and now the public is getting another chance to bet on Mahomes. It almost feels too easy, but I mean, I think in this one, for me personally, I'll just get ahead of it right now. I'm going to have the Chiefs winning this one a little bit reluctantly. I like the 49ers. I think that it sort of means more for the Niners for a lot of people on that sideline between Kyle Shanahan and Brock Purdy. And I like Christian McCaffrey a lot too. All of these guys sort of getting their first ring. I like the first ring over the dynasty. I don't think that there are too many people in the country that really love the dynasty all that much necessarily. If we've learned anything from sort of the history of sports fandom, it's that we usually like parody and we hate the things that are so dominant. And I don't hate the Chiefs by any mean. I definitely feel like, at least as of recent years, I have been sort of more on the side of appreciating greatness. And Patrick Mahomes, I mean, the stuff that he does is actually so incredible, and I feel like it would be such a waste to watch everything that he does out there on the field week in, week out, and get upset about it just because of how good they are. I think that that's sort of, I mean, it just goes to, Kenneth and I talked about it on his football podcast the other day. Just, it sort of goes to society and people. We like to get mad about things really that are just, I don't know, too prominent, too dominant, and that are just great. And it makes no sense to me. Patrick Mahomes, watching him not to sound dramatic or anything, but it honestly is a pleasure at sometimes the way that he just makes these throws. And listen, I firmly stand by, this is a little bit of a tangent. It's not like what he does has never been seen before. Elements of every part of his game have been replicated in some point in time. I still strongly stand by the fact that Matthew Stafford just got nowhere near the credit he deserved for the different arm angles that he throws with. Those years in Detroit, I remember being a little kid and being fascinated at those sidearm throws. I'm like, how does he do that? And, it was on a losing Detroit team that had very little flash. And for that reason, and for, kind of fair reason, it wasn't given necessarily all that much attention. But that combined with the mobility that he has, some of the no-look stuff, I mean, it's all flashy, but it's all sort of seamlessly threaded together to take all these different elements that we've seen from different quarterbacks in the past and put them together to this sort of new breed of quarterback. And, I think that he's changed almost the course of how teams want to draft their quarterbacks. They need to be these improvisers and need to be elite playmakers. And it goes back to this whole game manager versus playmaker debate. And I'm supposed to be talking about Super Bowl predictions itself here, more so than just random sort of Mahomes and Chiefs propaganda almost, because that's not something I would ever really want to be a part of. But I guess all of this just to be said that I don't think I can go against Mahomes again. Now, does this feel a little trap liney? The fact that the Chiefs are underdogs again? A little bit, yeah. But I just think that this is going to be a close game one way or another. I think that, both of these teams are definitely susceptible to the run game. And I think that there are two great rushing offenses. Now, it was announced that Joe Thuney, the Chiefs All-Pro guard, he has been ruled out for Sunday, but it wasn't a massive factor in the Baltimore game. It made somewhat of a difference maybe in that second half when they weren't getting as much push up front, but all in all, that offense is going to, for the most part, live and die by Mahomes. Now, you can go back to those championship games and sort of look at things a little bit of a, you can look at it in different lights where if the 49ers allow the Chiefs to run away with the game early and they want to try and let themselves back into the game like that, you're not going to have some of the mistakes from the Chiefs offense that we saw, such as the Jahmyr Gibbs fumble. And I think that the defense on the other end is far more elite than we saw with the Detroit group, and that was sort of a thing that surrounded the Detroit Lions for a while this year, is just sort of the lack of difference makers. And they definitely, I like the Lions core, I'm not going to dig into them too much right now, but that secondary was very much vulnerable, and we sort of saw why. The Vildor pass that went off of his face mask into Brandon Ayuk's hands, and late in that game, they weren't really shutting down anything for them once the 49ers started feeding Debo, and once they had an opportunity to play the script that they wanted and sort of get into the real Shanahan offense, it was all available to them. There's way more talent on this defensive side with the Chiefs. And another thing that Kenneth and I talked about on the football podcast was the fact that I feel like a lot of people are sort of chalking this up as the 49ers are, all in all, the better team than the Chiefs. It's just that the Chiefs have Mahomes. And I feel like the betting line would sort of indicate that as well. But, I went through the positional matchups earlier this week, and I actually had the Chiefs 6-4 in terms of positional groups that they had the advantage at. Now, there were some significant gaps, like if you look at, obviously, the receiving core, and if the Chiefs are to sort of fall flat, I think that that could be a massive part of this. But because you look at what the 49ers are going to try and do from a defensive scheme standpoint, they are going to want to get Patrick Mahomes off of his first read, off of sort of his spot in the pocket, and put pressure on him. They have the guys up front to do so. They have maybe the four, if you're just going on paper, at least talent wise, probably the four best down linemen that are in the NFL. They've been, great. Well, they've been good. Obviously, we know how good of players they are. They've been underwhelming, though, is part of the issue. Now, I have no doubts about Nick Bosa. I think that Javon Hargrave has been a very solid player for them as well. They went and they spent the big bucks on him. And I'm curious for him specifically, being one of the interior guys, because we look at this matchup, and I think that he's going to have to play a big role on the inside with the run game. We obviously know how good the linebackers behind that front four are between Fred Warner and Dre Greenlaw, but you're going to need to have some disruptors up front. And the fact that Joe Thuney isn't going to be playing, and we saw last week the replacement be able to hold his own for a lot of the game, and the Ravens defense obviously is incredibly talented, so it's not like there's this massive spike in terms of competition, but I think that it's going to sort of come down to the line of scrimmage in a lot of ways. Like I mentioned, both of these run defenses, the Chiefs for a lot of the regular season, and the 49ers specifically since they've gotten to the playoffs, stopping the run has been a little bit of an issue for them. We saw the Packers get going on them when, and a Packers team that was sort of peaking at the right time, and Aaron Jones is a great running back, but, it's a little bit of a pride thing to some degree, this Packers team that was so young, and yeah, they were peaking at the right time, but, it almost felt like they should have just been more so excited to be there. And again, there's always debates about whether or not the bye week is actually helpful or not in terms of the preparation and the excitement level. There's a little bit of a tune-up game argument that you can make, but this was a 7-seeded Packers team, and they came out and they ran it down their throats. On the other hand here with the Chiefs defense, you're going up against the best running back in the NFL with Christian McCaffrey. So you get Willie Gay back from injury, which is definitely helpful. Again, I think that the edge goes to the 49ers as far as that positional group, but they don't really have, Chris Jones is a monster. He's one of the best pass rushing interior linemen that we've seen in the NFL in years. Can he step up in that run game? Can the other guys step up? I really like George Karlaftis off the edge for them, especially with a right tackle in McKivitz for the 49ers that's been struggling a little bit as of late and in the playoffs. So, it's definitely possible to get that push up front, but they're not quite as strong now. I know that the Niners scheme-wise sort of look to press the issue a little bit more, and you're going up against a quarterback in Patrick Mahomes where you have to do so. Can these receivers for the Chiefs make plays on the fly? Like we've seen Patrick Mahomes always be able to find Travis Kelce sort of in these semi-improvised second routes after the initial play breaks down. Do you have faith in the rest of the group to sort of make the big play when necessary? Because there's going to be chances when these plays break down, if their run game is strong going into the play action game. Can you win those one-on-one coverages against a secondary in the 49ers that can sort of let up big plays at times, relying on a lot of youth talent on that back end and not necessarily quite as high of a level as the Chiefs' youth talent, and really without any bona fide stars, because we talked about earlier, they lost Hufanga, their all-pro safety, earlier this year, and now they've just sort of pieced the rest of the guys together well enough to get to this point, but it's a whole different level when you're playing Patrick Mahomes, and he knows how to take advantage of different mismatches. There aren't really a ton of mismatches when it comes to these Chiefs receivers, but at least schematically, now that he's learned to understand literally the game of football better over these first 6 seasons of him being a starter, and even that year that he sat behind Alex Smith as well, he was a little bit of a late bloomer when it came to the mental side of the game. Now that he's getting there, he's definitely going to be looking for certain looks in the secondary to take advantage of. So I'm going with the Chiefs. I think that just between Mahomes, I don't want to be wrong on him really 2 weeks in a row in the postseason. It might just have to be a rule where you can't bet against him. And if they go out and they win this week, I think that there's pretty much a chance that we're going to have to just imply a rule never to bet against him, and especially not as an underdog. If they win this game, I can't see them being the underdog anytime soon in a postseason game. But that is my official prediction. I'm taking the Chiefs in this game. Again, a little bit reluctantly, but it is what it is. I don't make the rules. So we are going to be taking our first break with that. When we come back on the other side, we are going to be getting into some NBA as the trade deadline wrapped up yesterday. We're going to start with some winners and losers from the deadline. So stick with us. We will be right back.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, no, this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits, some moosey shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip, you choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Just gave my official Super Bowl prediction. I took the Chiefs. So be it. This is the situation we just happen to be in. But we will obviously be touching on a lot of that come Monday. But till then, going to spend the rest of this show talking about some more basketball-related topics, specifically altering around the trade deadline that concluded yesterday. I don't know. I think that in a lot of ways it was a little bit underwhelming. There really wasn't a lot of star talent that was made available for trade, and that was sort of something we knew coming into it. But then there were chances that we would see players that have been all-stars or have all-star potential, like DeJounte Murray or DeMar DeRozan. One of these guys end up being moved, and the two of them, of course, were not. And all in all, we just got a lot of small moves. It wasn't necessarily that there was a lack of quantity of the moves. It was just the quality of them that was, a little bit lackluster. But nonetheless, we are going to be talking about the winners and losers from this trade deadline. Now, I don't think that there were all too many significant, huge winners, but if there were to be any, I think that the New York Knicks would have to be on that list. I mean, just through the past month and a half, if you had gone back in time and asked me, what would it cost for them to get OG Anunoby, Bojan Bogdanovic, and Alec Burks, I would say a couple of, top young pieces, which to some degree they did have to give up. But to give up no first round picks, I would have not believed you had you told me that was the case. But the Knicks were able to pull it off. I thought that the price that they paid for OG, I mean, that was a little bit polarizing at the time, I feel like, with a lot of people. But I feel like if you had been watching enough Knicks games, there was just that lack of consistency with RJ Barrett, and then the fact that OG Anunoby was coming in, and I know that he is currently dealing with an injury. The update on that is that he should be back in practicing within the next 3 weeks, so that's good news for Knicks fans there. But I think that OG just provides all of sort of the highs of what we were hoping that RJ Barrett could see. Now, I think that RJ has a little bit of even a higher ceiling than OG, specifically offensively. Defensively, I don't know how many better defenders there really are in the NBA than OG, and I feel like that's sort of been overlooked based off of his time in Toronto. And when he really started to come into his own, it was after the 2019 finals, and the Raptors were a little bit of an afterthought. Now he has even take his game to a stronger level then, and playing with the Knicks, I know that he's been dealing with some injuries, but from what we've seen with him, he is somebody who can guard 1 through 5, and I think that he's going to be a game wrecker. It provides a whole nother option, being able to have this guy that, offense isn't really his main focus. It is about being a defensive wrecker. All he really does, and again, I don't mean this in a reductive way, but based off of what's expected from him, especially with Jalen Brunson running the show so much and all of the touches that Julius Randle gets as well, kind of just stands in the corner and knocks down shots. He's very good at what he does on offense. He's not, the shot creation necessarily, and ball handling never really developed like some might thought it would, but he's good at what he does, and he's phenomenal at what he does on the defensive side of the ball. So, we've already talked about this OG Anunoby deal before, but then to add Bojan Bogdanovic and Alec Burks, where Bogdanovic is another guy I was talking about this week, saying I think that he can really help a contending team, I should say. He's extremely efficient on all three levels, in the paint, in mid-range, behind the three-point line. He, has a lot of experience, and I don't mean that in just the way that he's old, but, he's been on some of these sort of middling teams that he hasn't been with a true contender, but he was a legitimate number one guy on the Indiana Pacers a handful of years ago when they made it to the playoffs with Victor Oladipo and them, and when they went and they played the Celtics in the first round. Now, they got ran over a little bit in that series, but, he's been there. He's been through the lows of the NBA where, it seems like he is ready to take on a bigger stage, and I have no doubts that he would, be able to fit in with a team and not be scared of the moment. Now, it's interesting to see the way whether or not Thibodeau is going to be playing him down the stretch. The Knicks have a very interesting, in a good way, it's a good problem to have, but with their roster construction, it's going to be Jalen Brunson, it's going to be OG Anunoby, it's going to be Julius Randle and a center. Now, Bogdanovic, he adds a lot of size if you want to strictly go that route, but he hasn't always been the best defender, but he can get you a shot pretty much anytime you want. And especially, I think he's an even better regular season guy just for the fact that anytime Julius Randle or Jalen Brunson miss time, they're a little lackluster in terms of other shot creators. So I think that all in all here, Bogdanovic, I'm spending a lot of times on the Knicks here, but I think I really loved what they did at the trade deadline. They didn't give up all too much. Gave away quickly in Barrett, where, like Barrett especially, if you tell me that he's going to reach his full potential and he's going to be an all-star player, that's great. I think that they're a little bit more on the win now. It's not panic mode win now, but they made moves to win now, and I think that they got better from day one, and it's not an all-in scenario. I think that this is a move that should set them a lot better going forward. The other team that I have as a real solidified winner is the Charlotte Hornets. They did what a couple other teams in the league this year did not do, and that was take a look at the reality at hand. You are not a good team. I mean, the Hornets are, even worse of an example of not a good team, not even mediocre, but they accepted what they were and they parted ways with some assets. We saw them trade Terry Rozier a few weeks ago. They now trade PJ Washington and Gordon Hayward. These are people that, good players. I think all three of them, really. But they weren't going to be a part of any sort of contending core. Maybe PJ Washington, but even still, I think that the Hornets are a long way away, and you end up getting a couple of first-round picks. You help yourself sink further into the lottery. I just feel like it was the rational, smart decision to go. And now they just had to waive their former lottery pick, James Bouknight. So, there's still a lot of moves away. But I do think that picking this direction, I think direction is the key word in that when we get into some of our losers. I think that's a win in its own. You end up getting a pretty decent return. You get Grant Williams, who is from North Carolina, so a little bit of a hometown guy, has played contributing minutes before for a contending team, and he's still on the younger side. Maybe they can get some things right with him because he was staggering a bit in Dallas. And speaking of Dallas, I think that when you look at this PJ Washington deal, it was a little bit of a win-win. Now, I only had the Mavs as a slight winner because I think that, what we were talking about this week was they should be going in because they decided to go in last year. And you traded for Kyrie Irving. And because of that, you sort of sped up this clock on, are you going to be a contender? They went the direction of yes. And now they're in a position where you trade everything that you did. You've moved these picks in the past. Is it just going to be for having some middling play-in teams for the rest of Luka's stay until he wants out? So they go out, they add PJ Washington, who, like I mentioned, I think that he's in a lot of ways a similar player to Grant Williams. Now, the efficiency with him offensively is sort of dipped year by year, which isn't a great sign. But, I think that he can be a good player. Again, Grant, supposedly there was some stuff that came out that he wasn't really getting along. He was rubbing some guys the wrong way in the locker room. So because of that, it sort of just made sense for them to part ways. And, even in that, they gave a pick swap to the Spurs to get Grant Williams. And now they let go of some other picks to get him and Daniel Gafford, who I actually love the addition of Daniel Gafford to this Mavs team. I think that Gafford is, just a very solid player. He's a good screener, a rim runner. He's going to be a great lob threat, I think, for Luka. Him and Derek Lively, I think, share a good amount of traits in terms of the athleticism and the rim running ability. And, he's a good enough paint protector. Now, we'll see what PJ Washington can do on the perimeter, because what I was talking about is I really like the Mavs offense. It's just a matter of whether or not they're going to be able to put together any sort of a defensive identity that they can actually, they don't have to just lean on their offense for 4 rounds straight, because at some point it's going to dry out. You're going to run into a team or two that slows you down, and there are some good defenses ahead of them in the Western Conference right now. So again, I have concerns about their long term here, and they unload a couple extra picks to put this team together. They are undoubtedly a better team today than they were yesterday when they made these deals. And it seems like Mark Cuban and this front office were already sort of telling us that they were all in trying to be a contender as soon as possible. But, they better hope that this plays out in the right way, and not just in terms of are you going to get a championship, but can you be competitive for not just this year, but stay in the realm at least for the next few years, and specifically prove to Luka that it is worth staying here? Because should Luka leave in a couple seasons, this Dallas Mavericks team is in big trouble because of all the draft capital that they've given up. They don't have control of their own draft pick in like 4 straight years or something like that later this decade. So things could get really ugly for them. You have to get Luka to stay. And as long as you have Luka, I think you can remain in the realm of at least a play-in team. And it stinks to not have your own first round pick, but don't let that completely burn you. Running through some quick losers here to close out. The main two that I look at here are some teams that didn't do anything. And I'm not talking about the teams you probably think I'm going to. My biggest loser is the Chicago Bulls. I would say I can't believe it, but based off of the track record of this franchise, I sort of can believe that they didn't make any moves. This is now, no player trades have been made for them. Trades including a player, in case you needed the little bit of a spoon-fed explanation there for what I mean. They have not made a trade including a player since 2021. This past draft, they traded a couple second-round picks to move up in the second round and draft Julian Phillips. Been a fine contributing player for them, but ever since putting together this roster a couple years ago when they were among the top seeds going into the All-Star break, a few seasons ago when they traded for Vucevic, they had brought in Lonzo Ball and Alex Caruso, and this team was, really firing. But as it's been pointed out too, this was a team, despite their very good record, were just 2-13 against teams that were over 500. So weren't even, fully considered to be real contenders. And it's only gotten worse from here, and they just continue to stick with this core. I think that I feel really bad for Bulls fans. I think this is a huge disservice to them. And to not move DeRozan, which, DeRozan's a very good player, has been definitely a potential Hall of Fame player when it's all said and done, but he just eats a lot of possessions for them. And you know what? He helped lead them to the comeback a handful of nights ago against the Timberwolves. And they're not a bad team right now, but just go get something for him, because now they're in one of two positions where they're either going to lose him for nothing, or they're going to have to overpay him and likely be paying him until he's 36, 37, 38 years old. And I don't think that that's much better of an option either. So they stick with him. Alex Caruso is someone that, selfishly and unselfishly here, I wanted to see him go play for a contributor, because I think he plays contending level basketball, specifically on the defensive side now, but the way that he's also been able to elevate his shot making. He's shooting somewhere around 40% from 3 now as well too. So he's become a real guy contributing on the offensive end as well, which you love to see. He's at 39.8% specifically from 3 this season. So he's been very good, and I didn't want to see him go to one of these other Eastern Conference contenders. So to some degree, I'm like, well, at least he's not there, because I am a Celtics fan, and I didn't want to see that for, very selfish purposes. But Alex Caruso, again, I just think he's too good of a player to sort of be wasted away here. And, I think that the Bulls just need to do some internal evaluation with the Kobe Whites and with the Julian Phillips, the Patrick Williams, and, the latter two names. The reality is the ceiling probably isn't that high. But again, it's this lack of direction that I've been talking about. And being in that mediocrity area is the worst place you can be in the NBA, and that's where the Bulls have been living for years. The other slight loser I will be giving out before we head to break here is the Atlanta Hawks. Specifically, this revolves around DeJounte Murray. Bogdan Bogdanovic was also an interesting trade piece that, could have been moved and they probably could have gotten some value for him, but, they just decided to stay put, and it just makes things very interesting going forward. When we were on the live show yesterday and the news came out that DeJounte Murray would be staying put, I sort of started spitballing some ideas of, well, what does this mean for Trae Young and the Hawks going forward? Because Murray is an expiring contract. If you think that you're not getting anything for him, or at least not enough, let me say this. If you have no plans to re-sign him, because as we've already seen, him and Trae Young don't really work out together. And I'm not saying it never can, and it's impossible that it does, but DeJounte is a much less effective basketball player when Trae Young is on the court than when he is not. That is even in this Hawks stint. It's not a pretty fit with them, really. And so you would think that if your plan is to go forward with Trae from here on out, you move DeJounte Murray, you get whatever you can for him, and you sort of begin the retooling almost this offseason. If you end up keeping him now, especially for everything that you gave up for him in the trade a couple of years ago, what does that mean as far as what Trae's future is? Because I don't think that you can just let him walk now. Again, after the package that you gave up for him a couple years ago, you're just going to sit there and be okay with the idea of losing him. You traded 3 first-round picks and a swap for him just a year and a half ago-ish, and now we're looking at this with, what are they going to do going forward here? I think that there's a real chance. Trae Young was reported to be untouchable for the Hawks during this trade deadline. I'm just curious whether or not we could see a change in that. I think that I talked about, again, in the heat of the moment yesterday, I talked about the idea of him going to the San Antonio Spurs. I'm sure they would potentially offer up a lot to him. As I've sort of thought it over since, I think that the Orlando Magic could also be a very interesting potential guy to throw in there. Now, the Magic have a little bit more of a win now mantra, and they didn't make any moves this deadline, but there is a chance I could see them next year trying to make the push. You obviously don't want to sort of stunt the development of these two amazing players that you have in Paolo Banchero and Franz Wagner. You have a ton of guards that could have some ceiling, but I think that, I don't know, it would be a pretty interesting matchup there, I think, if Trae was traded to the Magic. And again, I'm not saying he's going to be traded. I'm not saying they have even expressed any interest in it. In fact, they've done the opposite. But I think that it becomes an interesting conversation going forward. So on that note, we are going to be taking another break. When we come back on the other side, we're going to be talking about the two premier teams, really, in the eyes of the media, that decided to stay put and whether or not they were right or wrong for doing so. So stick with us.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Just gave out some winners and losers of the trade deadline. Now, notably, I did not mention the Golden State Warriors or LA Lakers. Both of them stayed put for the most part, other than the Warriors making one little deal to offload a Corey Joseph contract just to try and cut down on some costs. But really nothing all too significant for either one of these teams. They are the Lakers and the Warriors are the 9th and 11th seeds respectively in the Western Conference. The Warriors now obviously even outside of the play-in tournament threshold. So how do we evaluate these teams? What sort of expectations do they have for themselves? Were they right or wrong for doing this? I honestly think in both of these teams' cases, can't really blame them for not making all too many moves. Now, the Warriors were a little more interesting. I think that they had some more young pieces that they possibly could have parted ways with. Matching up the contracts gets a little bit messy there, so I'm not totally sure how that would have worked. Klay Thompson is obviously has the contract to maybe go out and match a star player elsewhere, but I just don't think that they were ever going to do that to him just based off of sort of the pedigree and how he has, been a part of this franchise for so long now. And it would have been a little bit dirty. Would it have been unforgivable? No. He has even admitted this year the hardships of him not really being the guy anymore, and he hasn't been. And, it actually is pretty sad seeing some of the interviews with him in the post-game scrums and the frustration he has on the bench. Curry was trying to console him the other day, but he was just so visibly upset because he's not the same player he used to be. And this is someone who he hasn't had it easy necessarily. He missed 2 straight seasons with different lower body injuries, and he comes back and he used to be just the epitome of an elite 3-and-D player, and we've just fallen from that. And again, it is unfortunate to sort of see the state that he is in physically and emotionally, but that's unfortunately how Father Time works. So all of that to be said, they potentially could have made a deal if they were going to part ways with a guy that has so much legacy and so much baggage within Warriors history. But it seemed like, especially to some degree, I'm curious what sort of factors the new GM played in, because in some ways it would have been easy for Mike Dunleavy, who took over for Bob Myers this past year. He didn't have a real attachment to Klay Thompson that way that Myers would have, and I think that Myers probably knew, and part of the reason why he's gotten out of that gig. By the way, I think he's great on ESPN and the basketball coverage that he provides, but I think he knew some tough choices were going to have to be made in the next handful of years. He probably still has some years ahead of him in case he wanted to get back into the NBA front office gig, but I think he's holding it down right now as an analyst. So, I just think that it never really ends pretty with dynasties. We saw this with the Patriots, obviously, as soon as this season, where they were just a miserable watch week in, week out. They've been a very miserable watch the past 2 years, and Bill Belichick ends up without a head coaching job. It's not supposed to end pretty. You want to ideally squeeze out every ounce of greatness that you can. And here's the thing. I talked about on the show a couple weeks ago the fact that I do think that we're past this core being a contender. As far as can they turn this season around, I do think they can to some degree. Now, they benefit from the Utah Jazz trading off 2 of their key role players in Kelly Olynyk and Ochai Agbaji, where they can fall out a little bit more. The Jazz and the Warriors are currently tied in terms of games back from the 1 seed. The Jazz just have played a handful more games than the Warriors have, partially due to the Warriors' delayed schedule. So they've played 4 games less than the Jazz. There's a very easy opportunity for the Warriors to climb themselves back into that 10 seed and at least be competing for a play-in spot. But again, even from there, let's say they get there, I still don't think that this is any sort of a real championship contending team. And I know that's not even a hot take at this point. That's how most people feel. But, they've had some highs lately. Jonathan Kuminga has been incredible for them for the past handful of weeks. I think he's so fun to watch. A little bit erratic at sometimes, but he is going to be at least an all-star caliber player, I think, the way that he is sort of taken off. Very high pedigree guy coming into the league. He goes to the G League Ignite, and he's not fully polished yet. There's a lot of mistakes still, and G League Ignite isn't necessarily the best place, I feel like, in terms of development of these young prospects. Comes into a win now scenario with the Warriors, and he obviously publicly challenged Steve Kerr in terms of whether or not he should be getting minutes. Lately, he has been getting minutes. He's been closing games, and he's been great for them. Andrew Wiggins has at least sort of been playing some good basketball as of late for the first, doing, 75% of the first half season. He has been pretty bad, just overall flat out bad. I'm still very curious to see whether or not whatever situation was going on last season where he had to miss a lot of time because of personal reasons, what sort of mental toll that took on him. Seems like it did affect him pretty much. But we're talking about Wiggins here, who he was disappointing in Minnesota his first handful of years. He comes out, he has that incredible run to help the Warriors win the finals in 2022. Now has fallen back down to earth a little bit. Maybe this is just who he is, but he's been building up a little bit of confidence in the past few weeks. Maybe he can sort of turn this around, and the offense as a whole has just been firing at such a higher rate since Draymond Green has come back from suspension than he was prior. The defense, they just don't really seem to have the all in all defenders and maturity that they did in the prime Warriors days, but they still very much can play offense, and they're over 128 points per game since Draymond has come back from that suspension. He seems to be playing with a little bit of a heightened sense of maturity. We'll see how long that lasts, but again, I think that they can be fine this year, but ultimately they can even be good this year, but what is good in this deep Western Conference is the issue. As for the Lakers here, a lot of different debates on whether or not they should have been active, especially LeBron James sort of pouring gasoline into the fire with that, tweeting out hourglass emojis, wearing a New York Knicks towel, doing all these things to sort of try and put pressure on the front office to make moves. But given where they are right now, I just don't know if making a panic trade really would have been the solution. Now, because they only have one tradable first round pick as of this past trade deadline. It was the 2029. What I disagree with them is thinking that Austin Reeves was this untouchable for them. Austin Reeves is a good player, but to make a flat out statement that you're not willing to move off from him. Rui Hachimura is another guy where, he's been dealing with injuries this year as well, but I feel like he could have been a movable piece. But, ultimately, I just don't think there was that much in the market that they could have gotten for him. I don't know if trading that 2029 pick alone to try and reach for someone to contend this season would have been worth it. A lot of this same Lakers core. Now, I know Jared Vanderbilt has a foot injury and he's expected that he may be out for the remainder of the regular season. We'll still see on that. But a lot of this core that's still remaining is the core that took them to the Western Conference Finals last year. And you get swept, but you put up a very good effort and maybe caught some breaks along the way, playing a Minnesota team that was imploding on themselves. playing a very young Memphis Grizzlies team that wasn't really to be taken too seriously, was struggling with health in the backcourt in the front court in the backcourt with size and injuries going on there. But you have a lot of the same guys. It would have been nice to more so see LeBron sort of embrace the guys that he has left with him on that roster and say, hey, we were there last season. We just have to start building up momentum. And instead, he's sort of been playing these cryptic games of trying to bully the front office into making moves that are a little irrational. But the reality of the situation is LeBron James isn't in the peak of his powers anymore. He's not, 29 years old. He's 39 years old. And as much as the Lakers would love to have him for the time being, he has this player option for a big number coming up this offseason. If he declines it and goes somewhere else, I think that, it's not as devastating to the franchise as it would have been if you're losing this prime LeBron James. They got their championship with LeBron, and they've had some good seasons, but they can't fully put themselves at his will just because he's a little cranky about it. And, I think this is going to be a little bit of a stretch of what kind of leader can you be? Because he's always sort of been known to throw his guys under the bus, sometimes more subtle than others, sometimes more obvious than others, but there's no denying the greatness we saw during the in-season tournament. We're just talking about the in-season tournament. It didn't mean anything all too much in the grand scheme of, does this make you a contender? I mean, they played the Pacers in the finals for that, but when LeBron really sets his mind to things and he's bought in on it and he's committed, he can play basketball just about as good as anybody else. And, I do think that they can maybe not be contenders necessarily, but they can definitely be in that realm. And, who knows? Once LeBron James gets hot, I mean, we're talking about one of, if not the greatest basketball player in the history of the game. And it's not like they have zero talent around him either. Would I be picking them? No. We are about to be heading into some power rankings here, and I don't have them in the contention tier, but they can be a lot better, sort of, than they've been playing for a good stretch of this season, and turn things around some, at least, to show who is still going to be a part of the team as they continue to stay competitive this year and years ahead. So on that note, we're going to be taking our final break, and when we come back on the other side, I will be giving my post-trade deadline power rankings, so stick with us. Welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. We've been talking a lot of NBA trade deadline. To close out the show here, I wanted to give the first official power rankings that I've ever given on this show and sort of see how how the league stacks up after making all these moves. Now, obviously, some teams may rise and fall just based off of the how these moves actually end up playing out. But I feel pretty decent about these, other than one specific category that could go either way. So starting out with my bottom of the barrel teams, these are teams 30 through 25. I have the Washington Wizards at 30, Detroit Pistons, Charlotte Hornets, San Antonio Spurs, Memphis Grizzlies, and Portland Trailblazers. Now, out of this group, I do want to say I love actually watching the Memphis Grizzlies in a weird way. This team has been through so many injuries this year and still compete just as well as any other team in the league. They end up losing pretty much all of these games because the reality is they don't have the same level talent as the others. But I think that they're a lot of fun to watch. They don't have necessarily stellar guys, big prospect guys, but they play tough, and I think that that is a little bit of a statement on their head coach and the way that they have been able to sort of build up the culture here. I'm curious how much Taylor Jenkins and some of the veterans on this team, I know they just shipped out Steven Adams, but if Marcus Smart plays any sort of a role into it. I mean, these are also, to some degree, these are desperate guys where they are looking to prove themselves. Some of these guys are coming off of 10-day contracts and they're hooping. So just wanted to give the Grizzlies a shout out, but I think that they are going to be getting even worse. I have them as 24 here. There's a very good chance that that is too high, but time will tell there as they sort of fall out after making some trades as well to sell off some of their talent in David Roddy and in Xavier Tillman was the other one they traded. So my next tier here, I'm calling them tough watches because that's what they are. They don't play a very entertaining brand of basketball. They can win games. They have decent players. They have good players, but the overall team camaraderie isn't really there. This is the Brooklyn Nets and the Toronto Raptors. The Raptors are obviously in this retooling phase, and they've been moving a lot of pieces around, and they could end up playing solid basketball by the end of the year, but just based off of a purely team chemistry argument and just a lot of the unknowns that come with them, I had to put them this low. They have been really struggling as of late, just blew the terrible lead to the Thunder a few days ago. I think that things are going to, at least on paper, at least record-wise, get worse before things get better for them. And, the Nets are the Nets. I don't know. They just made some sort of lateral moves as well at the trade deadline where it's kind of hard to gauge where they are as a team right now. Mikal Bridges, I think, is a phenomenal centerpiece to build around. They're in a weird place as far as rebuilding because they don't have a lot of their picks based off of all the trades they've made, buying into the big three with Kyrie, Durant, and Harden, then trading them all off. It's just been a mess. Is Cam Thomas an actual good, effective, and efficient player? I don't know. Looks cool a lot of the time, but I'm not sure it necessarily will translate to pure winning basketball. The next tier I have is the not totally sure what they are. That is 22 through 19. The Jazz, Rockets, Bulls, and Hawks. I think the Rockets are a fun watch. They haven't been quite as good as of late than they were earlier in the season, but they have a fascinating home-away split. They are 8-9 at 18-9 at home, 5-18 on the road. So they're an up-and-coming team. They have some good players. Alperen Şengün is a phenomenal player. I like bringing in Fred VanVleet to sort of help try and bring on the maturity of these guys. Dillon Brooks is an interesting piece. I mean, one of the most hated guys based off of how last season went. But a little bit of a heel. That isn't necessarily the worst thing. His teammates have talked about how supportive he is to them. So a lot of young players on this core. They are sort of figuring themselves out. As for the rest of these, I mean, I just talked about the Bulls and the Hawks in the segment, the 2 segments ago. You know, they just sort of are okay with this mediocrity. And again, I think the Hawks probably have some more moves to make down the road, but just not a whole lot going on there. And I don't think that they even really understand what they're doing. Next here, I have the Sleeping Giants and the Indiana Pacers. That is the Pacers at 18, and then the Warriors, Lakers, and Heat to close out the bottom half, I should say, of the league. You know, with these Warriors, Lakers, and Heat, any one of them could win a playoff series, and I wouldn't be surprised. I sort of ranked the Heat in this tier, really thinking about this sleeping giant, because we know Jimmy Butler has been pretty adamant that he doesn't care about the regular season, and it's almost funny when you look at how Joel Embiid sometimes gets hated on for him caring too much about the regular season. But it's like, what do we really prefer here? Somebody who puts too much effort in or not enough? That being said, Jimmy Butler, when it comes to the playoffs, he just awakens, and he is just about the scariest player in basketball. So again, these are sleeping giants, and you know, the Pacers are sort of in this same tier as far as how good are they right now, because they've had a lot of highs this year, this whole in-season tournament run, and you know, they haven't been humming necessarily since making the Siakam trade, but you know, they're figuring themselves out. I think they can also be a very entertaining. Would I pick them to win a playoff series? No, but they would be a tough out, and I just feel like they sort of are on the same plane as some of these other teams. Again, I would expect the Heat to be the team that sort of burns me in terms of these power rankings going forward, but that's where I have them for now. Frisky playoff matchups, 14 through 11. I have the Magic, the Kings, the Mavericks, and the Pelicans. All in all, I think that these are teams with a lot of youth talent, other than the Mavericks, who are a little more manufactured and bought in. But I mean, even with the Pelicans too, Brandon Ingram was somebody that they moved off of, but they sort of benefited also from developing their homegrown talent in Anthony Davis and sort of buying low on a guy like Brandon Ingram. And you know, they're an extremely tough out. The game they played against the Clippers the other week, a couple days ago, it was, blanking on when in the week it was, but I thought that, you know, the Clippers were coming back from their 7-game road trip. So, you know, maybe a little exhausted they were at this point, but Zion still fascinates me, because when he took over in that fourth quarter, he was just an absolute force. He was going straight at, it was Mason Plumlee, and was just bulldozing his way through, where they were giving him a few feet to sort of charge up almost. And then when he gets his momentum going, I mean, he is a friggin' train coming down the lane. So, you know, I think that they're a lot of fun to watch. All the teams in this category are. The Magic, I think, are also maybe slightly too high in this. I think that just with the defense aspect of it, I mean, especially the way that Jonathan Isaac has sort of come back from injury and the enforcer that he's been on the defensive end, I think they would be incredibly tough for any team to, you know, I look at it from a Celtics perspective. If Jonathan Isaac is going all out covering Jason Tatum through a series, I think that would really rattle a guy like Tatum or any of these other top wings in the Eastern Conference. I think Isaac, as long as he's healthy, can, you know, almost take them out. So Magic are a team, again, I think they're probably a little bit of maybe a year away from that true contention, but I think that they're in the realm, and I think that they could be in a prime position going forward in this upcoming offseason to sort of make some buying moves to push that timeline a little bit. Second to last tier here, I have can make the finals if things break their way. I wouldn't be shocked if any of these teams won the finals, but I also would not feel super comfortable picking them as of today. I have the 76ers at 10. I think them even being in this tier is a little bit generous, but have to just for the sake of, let's say Embiid comes back and finally puts it all together in the playoffs. I have them at 10, Bucks at 9, Cavs, Knicks, Thunder, Timberwolves, Suns. It's kind of tough having the Bucks this low, currently at 9. I don't feel great about that, but I don't feel great about the Bucks watching them on a regular basis. They just got steamrolled by the Timberwolves last night, and I know that they're dealing with this Damian Lillard injury, and we're making some moves, so they were relying on some guys. I think that Pat Bev is a fine addition for them. That was one of the little more underrated moves that were made between the Sixers and the Bucks. The Sixers get a little bit of extra scoring to try and help make up, at least during the regular season, with the Joel Embiid loss. Pat Bev comes to hopefully help establish a little bit more of a defensive identity. He has history with Doc Rivers in the past, so especially in that year where they made the playoffs and Pat Bev was going at Kevin Durant, they lost, but put up a little bit of a tougher fight than they maybe should have against a stacked Warriors team. So, I think that the Bucks can very easily climb from here, but they have work to do. And I would feel more comfortable taking the Knicks over them in a series. I think that the Knicks maybe don't have the top 5, top 10 player on their roster, but I mean, they have fully sort of bought into this culture that they've established and the two-way ability, the leadership of Jalen Brunson. And, I think that they address the bench some with Alec Burks, and they can be legitimate contenders. I wouldn't want to play them in a playoff series if I'm one of these top teams, and I think that's because the Knicks almost are one of these top teams in the Eastern Conference now, if you look at sort of how this season has played out, because, a couple of these teams in the top of the East have sort of fallen off due to various circumstances. So, again, I wouldn't be totally shocked if the Knicks won the finals, but I definitely don't have any sort of guts to call them a finals team just yet. Then for my bona fide championship contenders, I have 3 teams. Number 3, I have the Clippers. Number 2, I have the Nuggets. Number 1, I have the Celtics. You can call me a homer if you'd like, but I think that the Celtics have just about the best starting lineup we've seen in the NBA for a handful of years now, maybe since that Warriors team, and they made some moves at the deadline to just sort of even out their bench even more. I know they weren't huge moves, but Tillman and Jaden Springer are just sort of extra insurance. I think they would have benefited from a little bit of help in the post defense to face a Giannis, face an Embiid, face a potential Jokic should they make the finals. Bam Adebayo also kills them every year too. So if they ended up playing the Heat in a series. And then I love Peyton Pritchard, but just with his size, I think that especially we saw it in the Miami series last year, Jimmy Butler is going to hunt Pritchard on defense pretty much 10 times out of 10 when the two of them are on the court together. So bringing in Springer, who doesn't provide very much offense at all, but just adding a little bit of extra defense as far as their guards go, I think is a solid move. And fully healthy, I think that this is the best team in the NBA. Nuggets, I mean, it's hard to put them anything but number 1, given the defending champions had a big win last night. Struggling a little bit with depth, I think, relying a lot on these younger guys, and we'll see how this sort of plays out. They didn't have a ton of options at the trade deadline, so they don't end up making any moves. Clippers, great offense. Can they buy in on defense? I think that these teams, all three of them, are, if I had to put my life on the line of pick three teams to win a championship this year, it's easily these three for me. So with that being said, that is all we have for tonight. We will be back on Monday, back to our regular 2 p.m. time period. So thank you very much for tuning in. Enjoy the weekend. Thank you to the GSMC Sports Network for allowing us to host this show. I'm TJ Mabardi, and we will see you next week.